So this is my first raised bed. It's 16 square feet total. This is my second raised bed. It is 60 square feet total, 30 feet long and 2 feet wide. And this is my last garden bed, which is also 16 square feet. And as you can see, I've left the majority of the yard for the kids and the dog to play in, with very minimal space along the fence line. So if this garden is only 92 square feet total, how am I able to grow so much food in this small space? Well, in this video, I'm going to share with you exactly how I do it. Let's go. Hey there, welcome back to Mini Urban Farm, a channel about gardening and homesteading in the suburbs. My name is Veronica, and on this channel I teach people how to garden, grow their own food, homestead, raise animals, all that stuff in a small amount of space. So if that sounds like something you're into, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. In today's video, we are talking about how to grow lots of food in a small space, which techniques I swear by, and a whole bunch of tips that I haven't really shared on this channel before. So you're going to want to stay the entire way through, and I'm going to be sharing some secrets with you for small space gardening. Now, a quick side note before we get started. I am actually hosting a live workshop on October 16th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That is 2 Sundays from now. So it is going to be a workshop on how to grow 300 pounds of food in your backyard. All right, if you have a normal size backyard, right, I have less than 100 square feet to work with here. If you have a normal size backyard, you can grow 300 plus pounds of food in your backyard. All right, I will be teaching everything I know on how to do that in a live workshop with a Q&A. I will leave the sign up link down below in the description. So if you're interested in that, don't forget to sign up before the seats run out. Now, on the small space gardening note, you can see I have a trellis behind me. All right, this trellis is about 5 or 6 feet tall, maybe somewhere in the middle, and it's right connected, like directly behind, connected to my raised bed. All right, I do not have a trellis on the other raised beds, but I have this one, and it's the length of 30 feet. Now, I love vertical gardening, and I think that I would probably grow anything on a trellis that I possibly could. But one of the main advantages of growing food on a trellis is that you're able to pack in so much more food in a small amount of space, because the amount of space that you're actually taking up in your raised bed is just the stem of the plant, all right? The entire rest of the plant is growing upwards instead of sprawling along the ground on your raised bed. You can grow things like squash, tomatoes, beans, all right? You can grow so much stuff on a trellis instead of having it just the length of your raised bed, which saves you so much space. So if you possibly can grow up, I would definitely recommend that. I have had trellises in every single garden I've ever had, and that is one of my main ways that I've been able to save so much space in my garden, because in addition to all of the other techniques and tricks I'm going to share with you guys, vertical gardening is one of the best methods to save actual space that you have, ground space that we're referring to in these 92 square feet. Now, another one that I like to do a lot, all right, and I really swear by, is square foot gardening. I know that you can't tell, all right, but I, in my head, have a little grid for this raised garden bed. Starting with this little Brussels sprout plant over here at the end, all right, it requires a good amount of space. So you can see that there's nothing else planted around it. So in my head, all right, that is about 1.5 feet, 2 feet of space there that I've given it. So 2 feet by 2 feet, which gives this plant 4 square feet. Now, with these salad greens, they can pack in a whole bunch, right? You can pack in a whole bunch of salad greens in a small space. So I have 2 square feet here of one type of salad green, 2 square feet here of another type of salad green. I have some kale, all right, maybe 3 or 4 in that little square foot there. And I have other different types of salad greens spread out here, right, because I know how much each of these varieties can be packed in to one space, all right. The same thing with carrots here. I just left my ginger plant that was here before, but carrots have been pushed in this little line here, and then I've given my carrots about 4 square feet here in total. And the same thing is true when it comes to my okra over here. I have spread them out and made sure that I know exactly how many square feet these okra plants need. Okra plants need about 1 foot or 18 inches or so of gardening space. All right, so these ones are growing, right, not individual little boxes here, but definitely staggered within that, you know, that square footage requirement, so that I get optimum okra production without, you know, cramming them in too densely. Now, I love square foot gardening, all right? That is one of the very first things that I learned that really helped me to maximize the amount of space that I have, especially when it was a really small amount of space. All right, so square foot gardening is amazing, but it is not like ride or die, all right? You don't have to follow it 100% of the time. There are going to be instances where it's okay to break that rule, but for the most part, all right, I use that to plan out my garden, to know how much food I can grow in a small foot of space, all right? And one of the best ways to do that is to simply look up Swiss chard plants per square foot, or tomato plants per square foot, and you will see that tomato plants require 1 square foot. So I know if I only have 6 square feet to work with, all right, I can only grow 6 tomato plants. That really helps me when it comes to not starting too many seeds, and it helps to, you know, maximize the space I do have, because I know how much food I can produce with 6 tomato plants, and that really helps to get a good gauge on how much food you're going to be able to grow at the end of the season. However, this next method that I'm going to share with you guys is going to actually counteract the last one, all right? But these two can be used together, all right, to maximize the amount of space you have and grow a lot of food in one small space. So use square foot gardening as a base, all right? You're gonna, know more or less how much each plant requires from a spacing perspective. Then intercrop other plants in between them and underneath them. The goal here is not to crowd everything in together, all right? You want to make sure that plants have the proper amount of space. But if I know that 1 tomato plant requires 1 square foot of space, all right, and I am growing an indeterminate variety of tomatoes, which means that it's a vining tomato, and it will grow up my trellis, then it's not really using the rest of that square foot that, we have left it on the ground, which means that I can take some herbs and plant them at the base of that tomato plant, or I can take some beans and plant them at the base of that tomato plant, all right? And that will really help you maximize that space. You're not gonna wanna cram everything in there, all right? You don't wanna cram 50 other tomato plants in there, but in between your normal crops that you have, planting out some herbs or planting root crops where there aren't any other root crops planted, all right? Those are really good practices to be able to maximize that small amount of space that you actually have, without cramming things in to the point where it would harm them. Alright, so for the next one, I have brought you over to my little miniature greenhouse here. Alright, and just move some of this plastic. There we go. So my little miniature greenhouse is important in this next step because we are talking about succession planting. Alright, and if you know anything about succession planting, or if it sounds familiar at all, it's basically taking, some of these little pots here, making sure some of these seedlings are ready to go when I'm ready to rip things up, like this okra, all right, because this okra is getting ready to go and I have my seedlings ready to be planted in this small space. The same thing over here with my little carrot seedlings, all right, I will eventually thin them, all right, I know that they're super crowded right now, but once I thin them and they grow and I get tons and tons of carrots out of them, then I still have time in the season to be able to plant something like radishes, which grow very fast, or even add in some more salad greens. Now, if you want to try succession planting, you really want to know how much time those things take to maturity, all right? For example, I know that carrots take about 3 months. I planted them the middle of September, all right? We're talking September, October, November, December, all right? And between that time, right, December, I'm going to rip them up, and I don't start my next, spring planting until probably around March or so is when those things go out. So I have time between December and March to plant out something else in that same space. Now, I'm going to want to have that thing ready to go, all right? If I want to plant out radishes, I want to have the seeds. Or if I want to plant out some salad greens or whatever other thing, if I'm taking them from transplants to plant them in there, I want to have them ready to go, already started in my little greenhouse, and time to transplant them comes around, and I can just put them in the garden and have that already set. All right, so when you're talking about succession planting, if you're talking about radishes maybe that take less than a month, you're going to want to have the next thing ready to go as long as you know what is going in that space afterward, all right, and have a plan for that. You don't want that space to be sitting vacant. If you're trying to grow a lot of food in a small space, you have to keep reusing that space as much as possible. So by using succession planting, you can actually get more out of the same exact garden space, right? You get multiple crops in a row during that same season, and it's a really great way to grow more food, tons more food in that exact same space. All right, so for the next tip, or for the next technique actually, I'm going to bring you out to the to the front of my house here, and These are actually rosemary bushes, all right? But really no one in my neighborhood knows that they're rosemary bushes. They're in these lovely wine oak half barrel containers, whatever you call those. And I started these as tiny little transplants, and now they are just massive rosemary. Like that is at least 2 feet tall here, all right, if not more. And I prune these tons throughout the year. All right, I have one giant bush here and then another giant bush there. All right, those are 2 separate bushes. And the reason I'm sharing this with you guys is because this technique involves using like things that you can eat as landscaping or along a fence line. All right, you guys know this as my garden, but you can see this is actually along the side of my house. All right, this is my house. This is the fence that was here. All right, and I've made a U-shaped garden pushed back up along the fence line. And you can do the same exact thing along the sides of the driveway or in the front yard or whatever else, all right, just to blend in with your environment. All right, this is obviously in my backyard, so nobody is really gonna see this because we have a fence, but the front bushes, all right, that's something that everybody sees as they drive right along, and nobody can tell that it's rosemary unless they actually know what rosemary looks like or they're looking for it or whatever. I actually saw somebody in my same neighborhood, all right, had like this overgrown patch in the front of their yard. It looked a little bit overgrown, all right, but I could tell that they were actually sweet potato vines. All right, so somebody is actually growing sweet potatoes in this front little patch of their front yard, all right, just right next to their door, and I'm venture to say that nobody else knows that that's what it is. All right, so if you want to maximize your space, if you want to grow more food and try to cram it in, consider using landscaping, all right? And you know, you can put them in nice big barrels and make it pretty, but you can actually grow a lot of food without being suspected by neighbors. All right, so now for some tips and tricks and that sort of thing that I have learned throughout the years that I don't find too many people actually sharing, all right, especially like when it comes to small space gardening techniques. But these are things I've learned the hard way, and they are very, very helpful in actually growing lots of food in a small space. They're not really techniques, but they're tips that you can benefit from. The first of which is to grow compact varieties of things, all right? So if you're talking about tomato plants, right? 1 square foot per tomato plants. If you're talking about 1 Roma tomato plant, that requires a lot of space to grow 1 plant. But if you're talking about something like a compact variety of tomato, you can grow that in a pot on your, windowsill. You can grow that pretty much anywhere, all right? And it requires so much less space. And if you really wanted to, you can add a whole bunch of those compact varieties into one space and get a lot more food. All right, so look for compact varieties when you're starting seeds. I wouldn't really think that they would have these like in the big box stores, but some nurseries might have them, like smaller nurseries. But definitely if you're starting seeds, I have seen tons of, compact, small space varieties that will grow in a pot or that are meant for container gardening. Anything that it says it's meant for container gardening, that's really meant for like a small space. So if you don't have tons of space to work with, that is an excellent one, all right? And it's just as simple as changing the variety that you're growing. And the same thing applies to high yielding varieties, all right? There are varieties of the same crops, tomatoes, beans, whatever it is, that you can look for, all right, and you can find that say high yielding or high producing or whatever, all right? Things that are pretty much guaranteed to grow a lot more of your standard variety. So when it comes to tomatoes, one thing that I'm growing this season is a yellow cherry tomato. And the back of the seed packet and the online description actually says high yielding, prolific, all right? All of these words that mean that you're gonna get a lot more in that same space. So in that 1 square foot for my tomato plant, instead of growing a regular tomato, I am growing a high yielding variety. You can do this on seed websites. If you go online, just look in the description and it will tell you if it is a high yielding or a prolific variety of whatever crop you're growing, because you're guaranteed to get more for your money and for your space. And another place to look is actually in the comments, all right, on those seed websites. So if you go to a specific variety and the comments say things like high yielding, prolific, grows tons of food, I got so many tomatoes off this plant, things like that. If you're seeing those kinds of comments, it's probably something that is, meant to do a lot in a very small space. So just by changing the variety to something that is guaranteed to grow more, you're gonna get more. All right, so my next tip is to not overcrowd your space. All right, now I know I'm talking about planting out densely and intercropping and all these things that basically mean cramming lots of food into a small space, but you have to know when the limit is, all right? You cannot cram 35 tomato plants into one tiny little square foot because it's just not going to let the plants grow, all right? There is a limit to how much food you can actually plant. Do not overcrowd your plants. If a Brussels sprout plant says it takes, between 2 and 4 square feet, give it enough room to grow. You can intercrop maybe some herbs and stuff around it, but you're not going to want to plant out 5 Brussels sprout plants in 1 square foot or 2 square feet or whatever it is that the spacing is required for that plant. All right, make sure that you are not overcrowding your plants, because what's going to happen is they will all be fighting for the nutrients in that same soil, and none of them are going to get enough of what they need, which means that that plant is not going to grow. None of the plants are going to grow, and you're going to end up with absolutely nothing. All right, so make sure you're not overcrowding your plants. This is something that I had to learn the hard way. All right, I used to do this with tomatoes all the time, and I was wondering why my tomatoes would not get any bigger. All right, my baby little seedlings never produced anything, and it was because they weren't getting enough nutrients and they weren't growing at all because I had like 30 of them in one little pot. All right, and my last tip on how to grow tons more food in a small space, and this is one that I absolutely swear by, is to map out your garden space ahead of time. Now hear me out. I know no one loves spreadsheets and planning all of these things out. You just want to be out in the garden planting your seeds, and I completely get that, all right? But mapping out your garden ahead of time, just take maybe an hour, jot down everything, even if it's not on a spreadsheet, if it's on a notebook or whatever it is, just look up some of the spacing requirements, look up some of the companion plants, look up where your plants you think you want to put them in the garden, jot them down, all right? Make a little grid of your garden, even if it's just like half a napkin sketch. All right, because mapping out your garden will actually allow you to see, what plants should go where the lighting is, where the water is, plants that grow well together, plants that don't grow well together. The last thing you want to do is just spread all of the seeds everywhere and then have things come up and they're not really in the right place, or they're growing next to something that will kill them, or they're getting too much shade and they really required a lot more sunlight. By mapping out your garden, you're able to see all of these things, all right, on your little sketch here, and you're able to fix it ahead of time so you actually get the amount of food that you want in your space. Now, I have an entire video on how I map out my garden on the computer. I will leave that here somewhere for you guys. If you want to watch that, go and check that out, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.